And then we have process and effect. And another use of diagramming, okay, is to demonstrate the evolution of design and how it has actually served in the end. Okay, so this is essentially, the visual process of the communicating the design and forces behind the ideation of the project. However, it also demonstrates, various aspects of that design and how it can actually, well, basically what are the endpoints of it. Here we have, on the right we show, this diagram shows, essentially how the sun moves through the space and how that the building or the spaces were developed in order to align with that. Okay, and then also you can see on the left there's the aspects of the route through the building. Okay, so that's something that they considered, and that's something that they feel like they should express through the diagram of this. Now, rigor, as I mentioned, is a term that you'll hear throughout your education and your career. So in all, the process of diagramming is coupled with research. And as I said, there is no right or wrong. It's just going through and exhausting the process. And it allows a designer to be able to pick apart buildings and spaces through diagramming. So it is a crucial process as it creates a mental imprint of that discovery, as well as it conditions us to an analysis process. So hopefully, beyond this lecture, you'll be going into spaces and immediately you'll start to analyze. Okay, I always say that the process of analysis ruins, somebody's experience of spaces or buildings for the rest of their life, because really what you should be doing from this point on is you should be going into a space and taking a second and looking around and start to say, okay, well, how was the space designed? How did the designer create it and make it for what it was? And that's the process of analysis. So, it is a process that's going to follow you throughout your career. And it is through this process that we become better analyzers, seekers of information, processors, and communicators. So it is, like I said, it's a rigorous process, but it will improve the more that you do it. Now, the tools for this process are essentially development and research, okay? And we'll get to that in a second. So the tools, when we start to develop these types of diagrams and analysis, what we have to look at, in addition to what we've already covered, the underlying aspects of design, whether it's program, whether it's site potential, whether it's the language of the building, what we also have to look at is, okay, well, how do we communicate that? And in communicating that, there are important things to consider. The first one is scale, and scale is always very, very difficult for somebody, who's first starting off to communicate, okay? Because they tend to draw their people too small, they tend to draw their furniture too small or too big, because what they want to do is they know proportionally things have to fit. However, what they'll do is they'll undersize things in order to fit into a space, okay? And that's a big problem when you start to create construction drawings, because you have to fit the actual dimensions of something. So when you start to work through this process, it might be important to include a scale figure. And what that does is it creates this connection, as people, okay, you have a general understanding of scale based off of other people. And so what this does is it allows somebody to see that scale figure and then see it in the either the diagram, okay, or the sketch or the vignette, and they'll see that connection between the scale of the person and the scale of the building, the space, whatever you're analyzing. So it's a good indicator to help you communicate scale, because as you think about drawing, okay, and especially freehand drawing, it's scaleless in a way. You could theoretically, create whatever scale you want. So it's important to, have something, okay, that somebody can connect to in order to create scale. The other is context, and this is, again, it's something that you're going to get used to, because you can either show too much or you can show too little. So you have to ask yourself, okay, how does my space, okay, and you're going to be starting off analyzing buildings, how does my building connect to its immediate site and the site that it sits on, okay? And it might be that it's, you know, an object in a field, that it connects to the field. You know, you really can't have the object without the field and still get the same meaning and idea behind it. Or it might be, you know, let's say in a you know, center lot, okay, within a city structure, and maybe that might not be as important. So what you have to do is you have to start to think beyond the space itself, beyond the building itself, and ask yourself, okay, what are the extents of the design? Because, you know, it might be surprising, but the design is not always in the immediate sight, and that's something that you have to, you know, consider. But also, you know, when you're going to get the drawings for your buildings, you know, but when you start to analyze on your own, you have to walk around a space, okay, and you have to walk through a space, because you might find that the space, you know, might just stop where it is between four walls, but rather it's part of a much larger narrative, and that's for you as the analyzer to discover. So when you start to think about context, think about, you know, what does my space connect to? What are the adjacent spaces connecting to? What does my building connect to? What are the adjacent buildings or fields or other smaller buildings, you know, that my building might connect to? And that'll start to inform the idea of context in your presentation too as well. Detail. Detail is going to be another thing that we're going to be working on, because it's another one of those aspects that, you know, it's, especially in construction drawings, it's another aspect that needs getting used to, because the larger your drawing is, the more detail it needs. And so it's about finding, you know, basically the balance between what is too much for the scale of the drawing and what is too little for the scale of the drawing. So if you find that you have a big drawing, or if you find that your drawing looks empty, okay, that's usually an indicator that you may not have put enough detail in for that scale. You know, that's usually like, that's the red flag. So if you find yourself, and, you know, again, sure, you have some modern buildings that might not have that much detail to them, but if you find yourself thinking, well, this is too bare, this is too empty, you know, more often than not it probably is. And again, it's just getting used to the scale and the detail of it. And the detail, again, and this is also alludes to context as well, it might be confined to just a specific space. I mean, if you look in this sketch here by Francis Ching, you know, he doesn't show the whole space, but he shows, you know, he abstracts what's in the front, and then towards the back he starts to add more detail, because that's his focus, okay? And that's where this, not only the role of context, okay, but, well, actually all of these, you know, Poche could do this, detail can do this, context can do this, but what it can do is it can focus the viewer on what is the aspect that you want to connect them to, okay? How do you grab their attention? And one is by, you know, leaving maybe some detail out. You don't have to detail everything. You can see that in that sketch, okay, on the right hand side, he just starts to profile things in, and that's fine, okay? But what he does is he's really pulling you into the sketch using detail, and that's something to consider. Also, you know, off to the right, there's poche and shading. So do you also attract the eye by using different areas of context, lights versus darks? Do you add shadows in order to add an extra element of shading or shadow that, you know, might be applicable to the space? You know, again, it's just testing this out and finding out for yourself. But adding poche is another very common way of people attracting the viewer, or starting to also abstract the space, okay? Because as you can see, it starts to make these spaces look more like geometries and forms. So that also might be, you know, the power behind poche as well. But again, you know, keep in mind, you have to be selective about what you include or exclude, as every bit can change, okay? And the meaning behind the drawing and the message should not be compromised. And so that's our most important. Research. Now, as I said in the beginning, in all, and what I keep saying is that there are no rights and wrongs, but the process of diagramming coupled with research, okay, allows the designer to be able to pick apart buildings and spaces through diagramming. So it's a crucial process, as it creates a mental imprint into the discovery of the aspects of the space and the aspects of the design, as well as the conditions us to an analysis process. So that's a process, as I've said over and over and over again, that will follow us throughout our careers. It is a thorough process that we become better analyzers and communicators.